Content warning. This is a movie about drugs, so we'll be discussing that. This video will also contain brief discussions of miscarriage, incest, sexual violence, self-harm, and the death of children. Also, major content warning for discussions and visual depictions of the French. New French Extremity is a genre of film characterized by its excessively controversial themes, boasting such infamous standouts as a Serbian film, 120 Days of Sodom, and Martyrs. French Extremity seeks to examine the kinds of things I literally cannot say in the first, minute of a video, so you'll need to use your imagination. The new French Extremity genre has always repelled me on the basis of offering content both extreme and French, but when I visited my buddy Sam's house and I'd already seen Talk to Me, he picked something he assumed we'd both be newcomers to. Little did I know that something would be the sensory nightmare Climax, a movie that clung to me miserably for days until I came to the internet to try and find one of those comprehensive Reddit posts or YouTube analyses to sit and process my feelings on the movie with, to break it all down and turn it into something I could understand and consequently get over. And there were none, so I guess I'll do it. Climax is based on a true story in the same spirit as the Conjuring franchise, if you catch my drift, apparently retelling a story from the 1990s of a French dance group who were all spiked with LSD, a psychedelic drug. Nothing crazy happened, the drugs eventually wore off, and the group went to bed. In fact, the original story is so unremarkable that many have tried and failed to find its source. In Climax, however, events pan out very differently. Gaspard Noé, prolific French Extremity writer and director also responsible for the infamous Irreversible film, I Stand Alone, Vortex, and Enter the Void, amongst many others, commented that Climax became an open adaptation of the aforementioned story, also inspired in part by his experience in a voguing ballroom in December 2017. He doesn't go into much detail on what exactly he saw in said voguing ballroom, but if we're to take him at his word, then this movie speaks for itself. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wanted to learn programming whilst assisted by a bear wizard named Boots? Yeah, I thought so. I'd like to take the time to introduce you to Boot.dev, where you can have fun learning web development via Boot.dev's online, self-paced, captivating RPG game-style learning platform. Boot understands that the best way to learn is by writing a ton of code and shipping a ton of projects, so that's exactly what you'll be doing. With Boot.dev, you can learn the fundamentals of programming with the Python and Go programming languages, and then start building your skills in the style of an RPG. Earn XP, levels, and achievements as you complete quests and compete on a global learning leaderboard. They even do bi-monthly boss fights where the community rallies together and gains bonus XP for each lesson completed during the event. If you're like me, you'll love to learn code but really struggle to find help beyond Stack Overflow. Thankfully, Boot.dev provides an incredible learning resource in the Boot.dev Discord community. Full of friendly fellow adventurers, they're there to help you if you are ever struggling, a resource I wish I had back when I was learning how to code for the first time. If you try Boot.dev and you don't enjoy it, never fear. Every single course offers a free demo so you can try before you buy, and as an extra safety net there is a 30-day refund policy, no questions asked. Click the link in the description and use my code MERTKK to get 25% off your first month or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. That's MERTKK to get 25% off your first month or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Thanks to Boot.dev for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to Climax. Climax begins on the harrowing shot of a bleeding woman crawling out into the thick Parisian snow. She writhes and screams for a while, stretching out like a starfish, and then goes still. As the camera pans down beyond her onto a dead winter tree, we see the text, "To our makers who are no longer with us, you have seen a film based on real events." A vocal opponent of end credits, Gaspard rolls his right at the beginning and they end with the stock siren sound that I immediately recognise from the Silent Hill movie. That's not a criticism, I just got a bit excited and blurted out Silent Hill like a gibbering moron when I saw it, so I thought I'd mention it here too. Presenting a French film and proud of it, the on-screen captions read sarcastically. Despite this cold open, the first 50 or so minutes are a slow burn introduction to a massive cast. The story of Climax begins with a video reel of interviews with the dancers in which we learn their names and a bit about them. There are 24 members of this ensemble cast, and Noé makes sure we get an introduction to each and every one of them. This is partially because, in his own words, he was so happy with their performances that he wanted each of the actors to get an opportunity to build upon their heavily improvised characters and actually film these last. Initially they were just for a DVD release extra menu thing, but made it into the final film because Noé was so impressed. This is also because someone is going to spike the punch bowl, and this allows him to set up red herrings to keep you searching for the perpetrator across the length of the film. Each member of the cast is asked a different question. Beginning with softballs like, what does dancing mean to you, the interview eventually oscillates through topics spanning philosophy and practicality. One man, Kira, comments that he's never worked with gays before, and the thought makes him nervous. One man excitedly remarks that America is heaven on earth, before admitting he's never been there. I come from hell, he concludes, shrugging uselessly at the camera. Shirley, a woman whose inclusion in the movie basically starts and ends here, states the core message of the film succinctly. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Dom tells us that when you're alone it's make or break. In my experience, it's usually break. One dancer, Psyche, tells us that she moved over from Berlin because there's too many drugs in Berlin. I want to do what I do without being fucked up. My roommate would put drops of acid in his eyes. I want to be away from that. Sibling duo Gazelle and Taylor are interviewed together. Taylor explaining, dance is an activity that keeps us close, as he puts an arm around her. When Gazelle tells a story of having been to New York before, Taylor jealously asks, with who? Omar is asked what he thinks happens after death. He, a deeply religious Muslim, answers, paradise. When pressed on what that means, he smiles. Only good things. No problems. Overall, the troops' attitude to drugs seems to be fairly moderate. A couple of them shrug their shoulders and admit to having done a line of coke here and there. One of them explains that he likes to dance after smoking marijuana because he likes the way it makes him feel. But by and large, the focus of this group is on dance. These people love to dance. A man named Cyborg explains that he's more about girls than drugs, regaling us with a story of how he smashed a man's head open once. As the interviews crawl to a close, we see the group dancing in a fully choreographed, roughly 10-minute dance segment. The kind of dancing we see here in Climax is known as whackin, spelled Waackin, a specific kind of movement under the punk style umbrella that involves moving your arms above your head in a rhythmic fashion. This is done here on a background of the French flag, massive against the back wall. Everyone is dancing here in vibrant colours. The women mainly in red and black, besides a few standouts, Dom, Selva and the DJ in gold. The men are all in black with white striped tracksuit. The men all clumped together dancing as a big pack. The women and gay men dance together, the two groups physically together but also somehow separate. Psyche, our Berlin character, rips off her clothes to reveal a glittering purple bikini. Her body is exposed and becomes the center point of the dance. The whole time the camera is drifting between a top-down angle and a front-facing angle, watching the action unfold from multiple perspectives. As their routine comes to a close, one of the dancers shouts, "God is with us," the DJ adding, "Let's party." Sangria is served to the group alongside a medley of snacks and other beverages, made proudly by troupe manager Emmanuel. The song playing is even called Sangria. Written exclusively for this movie by Daft Punk's Thomas Bangalter, Sangria is an interesting choice. Noé chose it specifically because it was always sangria he'd used to get his classmates drunk, calling it his first shamanistic act, him being the shaman. There's a ritual to the way he describes serving drinks, like he's bestowing an experience on people. David, who I had in my notes as greasy tracksuit guy, immediately gets on the graft. Classic bottom feeder, he begins wandering from woman to woman, offering them a drink as an in. The first one that responds even remotely positively is yanked to the side as he tries to get what he can, physically. Selva reminds him, "I told you no yesterday," and he behaves as though he never heard it, undeterred when she pushes him away. "I want to be with you," he says, in a way that makes my skin crawl, and she shoves him off, telling him to go dance. We see Gazelle taking a keen sexual interest in Omar, while speaking to her jealous brother Taylor. We see manager Emmanuel's son Tito drinking a bit of the sangria before being told off. Lou, who we will soon learn to be pregnant, comments that this is no place for a child, projecting her own worries onto Emmanuel and her son. Selva comments jarringly, "She's raised him well. She was right not to abort him." Lou responding, "Have you ever had an abortion?" Birth is a unique opportunity appears on screen. Noé is vocally anti-natalist and anti-choice. As we'll discuss when we reach the analysis segment of this video, Noé firmly opposes having children, but he also firmly opposes abortion. No life, but also no death either, he remarked in an interview with the Guardian newspaper, with the air of a man for whom this discussion will only ever be hypothetical. We'll see more of this attitude flesh out as the movie unravels. Psyche stands off to the side and observes the party blithely. Disinterested when people try to dance with her, she smokes the whole time. Although this is not revealed until the final shot of the movie, Psyche is the person who spiked the punch. You might recall that her introductory interview featured her making damning comments about the drug scene in Berlin, and one drug-obsessed roommate who she moved to Paris to escape from. Psyche was talking about herself, and clearly deflecting suspicion in advance, implying that this was a planned move from well before the dance practice even began. In a conversation with Ivana, who is frustrated by Psyche's holier-than thou coldness, Psyche snaps that she, and the troupe by extension, are boring, sparking her initial idea of spiking the punch to liven up her own evening at the cost of everyone else. We learn that Emmanuel doesn't have custody of Tito, nor does she see him very often. She puts him in bed and kisses him goodnight, telling him how much she loves him and how their 3 days together have been so special. The movie transitions into a segment I came to refer to as the talking head segment. In this portion of the movie, several pairs of characters stand with their back to glitter walls, and the actors were basically instructed to improvise conversations off the back of how they'd been characterized. Two men remark about how there are too many French flags on the wall. Another pair commented that there were too many crucifixes on the wall. One says God is great, and the other retorts that God and dancing have never gone together, ever. A factually incorrect comment that serves more as a way to foreshadow what's about to happen. Hallucinogens, particularly DMT and mushrooms, are sometimes thought of as a spiritual gateway. The upcoming effects of LSD are likely the reason for all the God imagery sprinkled across this story. One pair discusses drugs, specifically the idea of how even if you were to try drugs in a safe place surrounded by people who care about you, you're never truly in a safe situation because you don't know where they come from. Some discuss STDs and how they spread. Taylor confronts Gazelle about her sexual interest in Omar, exclaiming, "Your life is my life," and accusing her of disrespecting him by dating men. Gazelle remarks that she and Omar have been together for 9 months. This is hardly some fling. In another conversation, David begs Omar to let him join him and Gazelle in bed later that night, and Omar smiles with a detached, "if I downplay this, maybe he'll fuck off" kind of way, basically waiting for David to buzz off and bother someone else. The two key conversations in this segment are the ones involving Cyborg and David. Both of these gentlemen are horrendous misogynists coming from two ends of the same spectrum. David is a miserable incel, a man who brags that he's had every girl in the troupe, but in reality cannot even get them to look at him. He claims to have fucked Selva the prior day, bragging that she's crap. Later in the movie, we will see him beg and cry and throw tantrums when she will not give him the time of day. In this conversation, he looks at the girls Ivana and Psyche, commenting coldly that they need cock. As for Cyborg, discussions on the spread of STDs evolve into discussions of what it means to be good at sex, and eventually he and his friend are laughing over the hypotheticals of sexual violence. "I don't stop fucking her throat until she weeps. I fuck her wet or not. I bet she takes it up the ass dry all the way," they brag. Conversations turn to Selva, and the two talk about showing her who's boss. After rehearsal, follow her upstairs and show her. I stick it straight in the ass, no waiting. Dom observes the two blonde women Ivana and Psyche, announcing that she's going to beat them up. At least it's implied that she's looking at them. I guess she could be looking at any peer, so forgive me if I'm wrong on that. Riley, a virgin, remarks sadly on how he is still a virgin. He tells the DJ that he reckons it will take 2 days to break David down and shag him, setting up the role he's about to play in David's life as a taste of your own medicine kind of guy, as he primes himself to harass David all night when the LSD hits. One guy talks about his ex. "Despite her mistakes, I love her, but she's pregnant, so we can't get back together," referring to the baby as a sweet butterfly. She had the baby with someone else. When the interviews wrap up and the LSD begins to set in, the second dance segment begins. The second dance segment is an opportunity for the actors to pave the way implicitly for their characters' arcs across the movie, their dancing serving as an encapsulation of their part in this film. I'll only mention the relevant ones here, but we'll discuss how they're relevant. Lou, the woman from the first dance, goes first in this segment. She mirrors her initial starfish pose from the first scene too, drawing a parallel to her death in the snow. The German woman's Psyche's dance is hypersexual with tons of gyrating and splits. Omar's dance is confident and self-assured, but Taylor, who is jealous of Omar's relationship with his sister, is a copy of Omar's, only wilder, faster, and angrier. Poor Gazelle only gets a second to dance, demonstrating her lack of agency within the story. Cyborg's movements are aggressive and erratic. Dom's movements are similar, but less erratic, more purposeful and assured. By the time we get to Riley, the circle is already collapsing in on itself. Ivana, the horny Russian dancer who is about to harass her way into Selva's bed, doesn't dance so much as she just thrusts hypersexually, moaning and arching towards the top-down camera. As if to mimic the way the story will go, the circle eventually descends into a mosh pit full of screaming and shoving as the structure collapses. Sangria spilled on the floor looks like blood. Gazelle tries to dance with Omar, but despite his sobriety, he doesn't care, doesn't even see her. Taylor chases her off the dance floor a moment later. She's easily the most tragic character in the film. At this point, the opening credits roll. It's 45 minutes into the movie. This is the beginning. After a cut to black, we return to a zoom-in, top-down shot of the sangria bowl. A cup is poured and carried through the crowd. Everyone is staggering about on the dance floor, lethargic and smashed. Ivana says she feels weird, Psyche tells her to drink some water, David is trying it on with Gazelle, who is able to escape when Riley tries the same thing on a furious and ashamed David. It's when Psyche, the only person aware of what's happening, pees on the floor, that Selva realises something is wrong. No one should be this drunk off a few cups of sangria. In retrospect, I wonder if Psyche did this on purpose. Until now, people were high and vibing. Some of them felt weird, but largely the vibe was euphoric and the chaos was under control. By peeing on the dance floor, Psyche drew specific attention to the nature of the inebriation, which causes uncertainty and fear and triggers the chain of events we are about to see unfold. Word moves around the crowd that someone spiked the sangria. Fingers point at Emmanuelle, the manager, since she's the one who made it. She's puzzled. It's when she insists that she also drank the sangria, holding a cup in her hand, and is therefore also drugged, that the heat falls off her and the group look for someone else to blame. Taylor points an immediate finger at Omar, who hasn't been drinking the sangria because he's Muslim. Everyone grabs him and shoves him out the door into the midwinter snow. Only 2 people at this party were sober, and one of them has just been taken off the board. This does a great job in implicitly isolating everyone left. There's no one to trip sit, so to speak, no one to help when things get out of hand. It adds to the uncertainty of the situation and fuels the tension effectively. When Emmanuelle catches her son out of bed and sipping some of the sangria, she shoves him into an electrical room to keep him safe from the swiftly escalating events on the dance floor, locking it and taking the key away with her too. The room contains live electrics she warns him not to touch, only he's drunk the spiked sangria too, so he begins to hallucinate cockroaches and screams of terror from inside the room. Emmanuelle, also drugged without her consent, is not in her right mind to be parenting, and what happens to her and Tito is entirely on the shoulders of an uncaring Psyche. Now you might have already commented to say, but LSD doesn't work like that, it doesn't make people attack each other, and you'd certainly not be wrong. You're not being the minority there. I'm hardly familiar with the stuff, I know, crazy, but even a cursory glance at the many discussions about this film will see people snubbing the inclusion of LSD as the drug of choice, narratively. So the choice to combine LSD with alcohol was quite interesting. Alcohol is part of a family referred to as GABAergics, G-A-B-A-ergics. GABA is an amino acid that also functions as a neurochemical like dopamine or serotonin. GABAergic drugs are a type of depressant. Most GABAergics tend to mellow out trips or be like trip stoppers. So when mixed with alcohol, LSD tends to, at the worst, cause vomiting and blackouts, and at the best, just bring the trip to an end. It was really unusual for Noe to choose LSD and alcohol and link that to mass psychosis. Considering Noe is outspoken about his use of alcohol and drugs in his youth, I found this to be a really strange choice narratively. Like, of all people, surely Noe would be well aware that LSD is not going to have this kind of effect on people. Personally, I just decided to assume that this was an anecdotal story. It's not impossible for LSD to have this outcome when someone is spiked unknowingly and ends up on a bad trip, so I decided to just believe that Noe had seen this happen once and then channeled his experience into writing a movie. You might have your disagreements, but this is what it took me to suspend my disbelief, rather than doubting and interrogating the entire lived experience of a man that I don't personally know. Ivana, fed up with repeated rejections from Psyche, calls her a useless cunt and turns her attention to Selva. Selva has discovered a vomiting Lou, who admits now that she has not been drinking because she is pregnant. When Dom comes in to ask her what's going on, Lou admits she's pregnant and Dom accuses her of lying, kicking her hard in the stomach twice and calling her a whore. She leaves Lou vomiting and crying on the floor, triggering a miscarriage. Selva staggers back to the dance floor, passing a woman the troupe describe as a coke fiend, who is set on fire when she refuses to share her stash. Tito is still screaming, his cries for help mixing in with the 1997 Daft Punk song Rolling and Scratching, an uncomfortable, piercing piece of music that undercuts the escalating feelings of the situations very well. Lou follows her, staggering around the dance floor looking for help and/or Dom. Stumbling into Dom, Lou demands to know why she did that. While she and Omar were the only sober attendees, she is no longer in an emotional state to offer any support. Dom turns the group on her and she's screamed at until she takes a knife to herself and self-harms, sitting on the stairs. There's loads of blood between her legs. Her hands are soaked with blood when she checks her thighs. She is joined by Eva, a little too late to help matters, but Eva stops her from cutting herself and holds her, and this moment of companionship is basically where both of those stories end. Escalations between David and Selva and Riley and David escalate, David too fixated on getting his dick wet to bother to understand that Riley is making him feel how he is making Selva feel. When she rejects him again, he throws furniture and punches the door until she screams in his face and cries. David's harassment of Selva triggers some kind of panic attack, and we see the cinematography acknowledge this as the camera flips onto its side, focusing on Selva, who is hyperventilating and bracing herself against the wall. She manages to steady her breathing, followed slowly by the camera down a green-lit corridor towards the bedrooms, which are now illuminated with red light. The following scene felt to me like an intentional reference to the subway scene from the 1981 film Possession. Selva's panic attack turns into a full meltdown, driven by the exasperation and rage of David's relentless pursuit. She becomes non-verbal, able to communicate only in screams and growls and grunts. She throws herself around in a manner reminiscent of her earlier dancing, only now animalistic and screaming. In interviews, Noe would suggest that drugs bring your primitive self to the surface. I assume this is a representation of that, either straight-faced or as a reference to the aforementioned film to suggest a quote-unquote possession of sorts by her primitive brain. Or she's just fed up of being non-consensually drugged and sexually harassed by Mr. What That Mouth Do, so your guess is as good as mine. After clearing herself up in the bathroom, she walks out to find that Emmanuel has lost the key to the electronics room. Selva offers to sit by the door and talk to Tito while Emmanuel looks, but soon gets distracted and leaves Tito to scream by himself. As she walks back to the dance floor, the reverse shot focuses on a man dancing by himself in the room behind her, body contorted to look like the hands of a clock, implying that time is ticking on. He's bathed in holy white light, seemingly immune to the events occurring around him. I tried to spot if you could ever see the key tucked to the side of one of the shots peeking out beneath a sofa or something, but I never could. David grabs Selva again, but is set upon by the men still present on the dance floor, who beat him unconscious and leave him on the floor. Psyche stands over the group, body like a praying mantis, watching the events unfold with disinterest. At this point, the camera begins to spin and flip on its head, directly reflecting the chaos of events as they unfold around us. The lights flash suddenly, music coming to an immediate jarring stop, and the emergency lighting flicks on. This is the first moment of silence we hear since the movie began, and it's because Tito has gone for the circuit breaker and electrocuted himself, short-circuiting the building in the meantime. Tito's fried, the troop chant, uncaring, and one of them grabs a boombox to use as Emmanuel screams, and runs back to the unsupervised electrical room, still without the key. Ivana, now twitching and dead-eyed, grabs Selva and drags her back to the bedrooms, which are illuminated green and blue now. We see Ava here briefly, scrubbing herself clean of loose blood in the shower, and maybe accidentally rubbing herself raw in the process. We hear screaming from another room. Ivana, who has behaved just as much an incel as David this evening, drags Selva into a blue room to initiate weird, tearful, uncomfortable sex. This exchange is as lifeless and miserable as you could imagine. Selva clearly worn down by an evening of sexual harassment, but taking some solace in the fact that being locked in this room with this woman means she doesn't have to face the horrors out on the dance floor. I also assumed she was doing this because she thought David had been beaten to death out there, and felt some guilt for not simply giving in and letting him shag her if it meant he'd still be alive. Unlucky for her, David is very much alive and undeterred, showing up in their room to try and have sex yet again. She screams and screams at him, kicking him back out into the corridor, and he still tries to get back in through the locked door, crying with frustration. DJ comes by with a laughably chill, "Leave the girls be," only to return to his room and find Riley, who is frustrated in turn with being rejected by David. David, DJ, and Riley spot Gazelle, who has been set upon by Taylor. They scream and Gazelle frees herself, running back to the dance floor by Emmanuel, who is announcing her intent to kill herself. The camera flips entirely upside down now for the last segment on the dance floor, which is illuminated in full red and covered in the remaining cast, who are painfully contorting themselves, bones crunching. Their eyes are rolled back into their skulls and they're chanting in tongues, bathed in red light. People fornicate on the dance floor. This room has become hell. Gazelle has a seizure on the floor and Taylor drags her away. The arrival of the police is heralded by angelic white light from the open door. The camera is still entirely upside down. Three bobbies walk in and stare, perplexed, at a room full of dancers whose status is yet unknown. Psyche is the only one still dancing, and a world of her own at the head of the dance floor. According to Noe, the only narrative directive given to this cast about the end of the story was that the most fragile ones will die at the end, only the strong survive. Abandoning the one long shot, we finish on a "Where Are They Now" montage, featuring each character's outcome. Several overhead shots with quick visuals. Dom is curled up on a chair, crying over what she did to Lou. Cyborg and his conquest are asleep together on the floor, almost peaceful. One man is dead on the floor, having choked on his own vomit. Two men, Kira and his friend, are asleep together, one scratching at a painful open wound on his stomach, a disgustingly subtle bit of body horror. Jennifer is desperately treating a vile burn on the back of her head, screaming and wailing into the bathroom sink. Tito and Emmanuel are both dead in the fetal position, Tito in front of the electronics cabinet and Emmanuel with her wrists wrist cut. Omar is frozen to death outside, also in the fetal position. Lou is alive, but completely mentally broken despite never touching the sangria due to her pregnancy. Ava is asleep in the shower. Riley and the DJ are curled up in bed together, unconfirmed as to whether they had sex or DJ merely comforted him. Gazelle wakes up in bed next to Taylor, having no memory of what happened due to her seizure. He begs her and whispers not to tell their father, assuring her that nothing happened. And Ivana and Selva are in bed together, Ivana, out of the covers, spooning Selva, who is under the blankets. During this montage, death is an extraordinary experience. Flashes on screen, upside down. The final shot of the movie features Psyche, who has been dancing and vibing the entire time, sitting on her bed. Her bag is open and drug paraphernalia is everywhere. Clearly not ready to leave the fun behind, she pulls her lower eyelid down and drips 4 full drops of LSD into her eye. A massive amount of LSD, and an extremely painful way to dose it too. She blinks and some of these drops trickle down her cheek like tears, and she spaces out as the screen fades to white, where the movie ends with the word Climax burned onto our screen. Of all the films I've ever seen, Climax has to be the most impressively produced. To think I thought the Two Storms episode of Hill House was impressive with its long shot cuts. Climax is composed almost entirely of several long takes of unrehearsed improvisation by a cast of amateur, first-time actors provided with no dialogue beforehand, one shot lasting over 42 minutes. Noe had conceived a basic story in a short outline spanning only a couple of pages, and never wrote lines. Instead, he sat down with the cast to explain the premise and their characters' personality traits, and then left the cast to improvise dialogue in most of the situations before the camera with no rehearsals. Whenever the cast members came to him asking for lines, he would answer, "No, just come to the set, do whatever you want. I'll never push you to do anything against your will, and if you have any ideas, please tell me what they are." He knew the start and end of the story, but allowed them to flesh out the middle of it. Only the dance scene had been planned beforehand, but was still iterated on during production until Noe was happy to use what they had, roughly takes 16 or 17. The movie was shot in 15 days in an abandoned Parisian school, entirely in chronological order to allow for rewrites, and Noe made a point to be extremely communicative with his amateur cast. I asked them, what would you enjoy doing in the movie? How would you want to shock an audience? I would never ask them to do what they do not like doing. Tell me who you want to kiss, who do you want to smash, who do you want to insult? And I would ask the other person, would you mind if this person wants to do this or that? And of course, the reciprocal person was welcome to propose anything. This resulted in Selva hooking up with a woman, rather than the man Noe had originally assumed she'd end up with, and allowed the DJ, played by Kitty Smile, to choose his previously undecided ending. We never learned the specifics of these discussions, and I would have loved to. Ironically, as dancers, they weren't especially prone to drinking, meaning production ran very smoothly. No one was getting wasted, everyone was happy, and the tone on set was friendly. The use of the camera as a dancer within the mob is an exceptionally immersive choice by Noe. While the camera will occasionally sit on top of the action, staring directly down on the dancers from above, like God looking down at his creation, it is often a part of the action, walking carefully through the one corridor connecting the dance floor and the bedrooms, sashaying through the dancing crowd, peeking into side rooms, adding to a sense of voyeurism typical of the genre, and one we'll cover later. Critic Robert Ebert observed, Noe's camera functions as a participant in the dance as much as it functions as a lens. Cinematographer Benoit Deby joins the push and pull between Noe's dancers, capturing their unbridled madness like a torpedo hellbent on annihilating anyone caught in its path. These long takes tap into the energy of the cast, forcing the viewer on a journey alongside them. A very literal trip as you wait for the effects of the drugs to wear off in tandem. There's a huge emphasis on change in this movie. Only the strong survive, as this becomes a survival of the fittest trial. Only some of the troupe remaining, reborn anew. This is marked by the long camera shots, but also the extremely long corridor connecting the two main rooms, often changing colour between scenes. Our focal points often enter new frontiers every time they pass through it. As the story progresses, the camera begins to flip and turn, reflecting the chaos of the ending. We see this in the choreography of the dancing too, where the first dance is nicely choreographed only to become frenetic and animalistic by the end. A representation of how the spiked sangria takes them. Noe commented on his choice to forego any visual or audio effects to reproduce the feeling of being on drugs, but rather shoot almost documentary style from the outside. Noe sought specifically to show, not tell, in the most literal way, and I believe he succeeds. The camera being entirely upside down by the end also represents the depths the groups have climbed to. Similar to equally French film, As Above, So Below, wherein a group of urban explorers must climb to the very bottom of the Paris catacombs to escape, the world suddenly flipping right way up when they climbed out of the hole at the bottom. The victims of the LSD spiking have hit the bottom, but we never see them climb out, implying that this is where they will always be. The survivors changed, but stronger. French extremity movies are characterised by 6 key themes that may be demonstrated explicitly or implicitly across their course, favourably or otherwise. We've got voyeurism, sexual assault, frank and graphic depictions of the body, feminism, national politics, and problematic personal politics. And these themes are no stranger to Climax, which exhibits them all. SPS Australia describes Climax as a metaphor for the failure of multicultural modern-day France, a fierce and unblinking examination of the animal urges underpinning human social structures, and this goes almost without saying, an obscenity. So to round off our analysis of Climax, let's examine it through each of the 6 themes as an independent lens, and maybe by the end you can tell me, is this even a good movie? According to Troy Bourdin, author of Genre Trouble and Extreme Cinema, Film Theory at the Fringes of Contemporary Art Cinema, voyeurism, otherwise known as spectatorship, is almost an ethical duty of French extremity cinema, i.e. they demonstrate to the viewer a reality that challenges them, forcing the audience to reassess their own preconceptions about humanity as a whole. By making the camera part of the crowd, Climax forces you to be an unwilling but intrigued passenger forced along a journey you have no say in. Obviously, this is only insofar as you personally engage. Unlike the dance troupe, you can always just leave the viewing or turn the movie off, but to stay implies a morbid curiosity and need to know what happened regardless of how horrible it may be. Climax allows you to fulfill a voyeuristic need of seeing a group of dancers fall victim to a spiking done for the mere sake of it. The poetically named Psyche was bored and people died because of that. Alongside the camera, you peek into the bedrooms to see Eva desperately scrubbing blood off herself in the shower. You watch Selva and Ivana begin to have sex until you are kicked out alongside the equally salacious David. You watch Riley cry over his rejections. The top-down shots are equally as voyeuristic in different ways. On my second watch while writing this script, I paid special attention to the group during the top-down dancing segment. This shot lingers for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. It's a montage of most of the cast dancing, and since it goes on for so long, I started to really pay attention to the details, see who was dancing and how, and whether that had any connection to the way their individual stories would play out. As we've covered, yes, there are through lines with their characters, but I also came to realise that I was studying them like bacteria under a microscope. The top-down shots were almost clinical in their application. The top-down shots also align with the numerous references to God across the movie. Characters often discuss God, paradise, exclaim that he is with them, remark on the crucifixes on the wall, etc., juxtaposing the movie's outcome as anything but. Psyche's interference in their implicit worship, their dancing, separates them from God and drags them down. The final shots of the dance floor, their holy place, for all intents and purposes, becoming a corrupted hell on earth. And that's before we even cover the meat and potatoes of this story. Although the movie touts itself as based on a true story, that's something I've come to take with a pinch of salt, and I think Noé would agree. If you want to stick to a real story, he explained in an interview with Candid magazine, you have to use the real names and be respectful, and that becomes tricky territory. Especially in unsolved cases, you bring your own mental perception of the situation, so it's good to change things so you're not restricted with the outcome. I have boxes with all these newspaper cuttings, and years later I come back to them and think, oh, this could be added, or this could be a family drama. So no, not completely a true story. While this implies he is retelling a story traumatic enough to become a news article, I don't know if I believe him. Rather, the movie, described as an orgiastic frenzy, is a voyeuristic scenario of drug spiking played out on a $2.9 million budget, specifically seeking to examine the differences between the faces we put on to be socially acceptable and the identity we see people become when inebriated. Noé sought to ask, do drugs reveal the authentic self? But then, what is the authentic self? Or do they just create an altered self? For some people, the perception shifts and they become very cruel. It depends on your own personality and how repressed you are. He stated that the film was all about people creating something together and failing in the second half. It's like the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Mankind can create big things, and then with the influence of alcohol or some accident, everything falls. The film is also intended to be about the impact of fear, shown at its most raw when combined with a drug. Fear can often be quite a silent emotion. Forcing its combination with collective spiking in an unsafe location meant that it was ripped open and raw. Climax ensures that fear is at its most loudest and overt, and we as the audience can watch the crumbling. In that same SBS Australia article, Noé explained, if you're spiked with anything, the experience will be very bad. If anybody spikes your drink with a downer, even if someone puts Xanax in your drink, the experience will be awful. Some substances that you can take can wake up parts of your brain that are not civilized, and also can suppress the civilized parts of your brain. There are situations where the sweetest couples can become, because the man or girl are totally drunk, Very cruel. And then the next day, the one who was the most drunk has a blackout and cannot remember. Whether you believe this and see the movie as a genuine effort to explore the face we keep hidden from society and even ourselves, or see the movie as a self-indulgent and pretentious spectator sport is entirely up to you. Climax has been described as a panic attack, a really mean movie that tries and succeeds in making you uncomfortable, and leaving you uncomfortable for days thereafter. We watch a woman realise that her son has electrocuted himself and died, fully comfortable in our position as spectator, absolving us from needing to care or help because it's a work of fiction. Is Climax an examination of the human psyche, or just an opportunity to watch inhuman hardship flower and bloom as a vessel of pure entertainment? The most famous example of how New French Extremity handles national politics is through a Serbian film, whose director argued that the movie serves as a diary of our own molestation by the Serbian government. Named as such to associate Serbia forever with a Serbian film, so much so that Wikipedia has to list other Serbian films under the title Cinema of Serbia, and offers a very friendly redirect from the aforementioned film page if you accidentally wind up there. A Serbian film is an extremely successful political protest, even if the quality of the content of the film is debated to this day. In some cases, New French Extremity uses sensationalism to draw attention to political matters even if the content isn't inherently political. In other cases, such as 120 Days of Sodom or Salo, the content is a direct allegory to political discussion, whilst also serving as a story that can be experienced without that context. In the case of Climax, national politics are arguably incidental and no way even admitted, probably a subconscious inclusion. So let's talk about that flag. When asked in an interview with A Rabbit's Foot editorial as to why he chose to decorate the dance floor with a huge wall-sized French flag, Noe explained, "We were trying to find which fabric we would put behind the set. We were given a blue one, a red one, and a grey one. So the day before shooting, we were deciding which of the three fabrics to put behind as a curtain. They put all three of them, but the grey one was on the right side. I said, hey, what happens if you reverse the fabric centre? What if we put it as blue, grey, red? And then we had the French flag. It was a very last moment idea. When we put it up, everybody went, oh, let's keep it like that. I'm sure it sounds funny, but it was not intentional. But at the end, it seems very intentional." Yet, in another interview with Candid magazine, he said, "It was a bit like a microcosm on set every day. In Voguing, they have families, and the whole thing is a bit like a womb, you could say. Everyone working together in this small, cozy space. I guess you could link the womb to a nation, giving the French flag a motherly metaphorical position above this small multicultural family, but also demonstrating the way Noe goes back and forth on confessing the meaning behind his work. In the Rabbitfoot interview, Noe made a point to separate the multicultural cast into three distinct colours too, commenting, "When I started thinking about the movie, I wanted to mix street dancers like voguing, crumping, or whacking, and mostly the best dancers for those kinds of dancers are black or immigrants, etc. It was essentially the quality of the dancers that made the rainbow of the skins that you see on screen. That's why we ended up having a third of the characters black, another third mixed, and just a third who were white." That said, I think it's worth taking a lot of Noe's interview answers with a pinch of salt. Despite filling his movies with his own personal attitudes, everyone does it, this isn't a negative observation, he has a knee-jerk reaction against acknowledging any injected perspective and prefers to give frustrating non-answers in the interviews that he agrees to be a part of. When asked, for example, why his movie Irreversible features hellish visuals of gay clubs alongside a 9-minute anal rape scene versus heavenly scenes of heterosexual sex, he kind of bums the questions off without really seeking to explain or defend his art, which is unusual for a man so typically happy to discuss why his personal experiences with drugs inform his creative and philosophical decisions. As we'll get to, I think Noe is just a massive conservative, but also a big reactionary. I think he likes to do things, likes to offend, but doesn't bother to discuss or defend his choices. A lot of his movies tend to be a series of him showing us horrible events while standing to the side and going like, what do you think of this? Edgy, right? But rejects any discussion that requires him to interrogate himself as a person. As someone who deals with likely a fraction of those kinds of deeply personal questions and assumptions, I get it. I understand why baring your soul to an anonymous horde might be an unattractive idea, but also if you're gonna make French Extremity cinema, you could be better prepared to explain yourself when attending interviews thereafter. Like, you could set up some stock answers without just completely deflecting discussion. A discussion I'll link over at r/truefilm by A Song of Ice and Fire fanatic sheds some fantastic light on the backbone of national politics across the film due to their personal insight as a black trans French person. Climax begins with the phrase, "A French film and proud to be," before displaying an ostentatious glittery French flag, and this combination comes off deeply sarcastic. As A Song of Ice and Fire fanatic describes, we begin with an idyllic image of a multicultural, multiracial Queen France, where ghetto culture and high art, trans and cis people, black, white and Arab people are all able to come together and form something beautiful and dynamic to export to other countries as a vision of peace and unity. Only instead we see a slow erosion of the underlying principles necessary to maintain this performance. What lies beyond is something else entirely. To add to this point, I don't think it's any coincidence that it's Omar who was thrown out into the snow and then forgotten. Omar and Lou were the only people who didn't drink. Omar because he was Muslim and Lou because she was pregnant. Yet even when Lou is accused of spiking the sangria and backed into a corner, she is never flung out into the snow and is instead comforted by Eva before being left to go about her business. We don't see her again until the end of the movie. Omar also isn't brought back when they start to accuse Lou. When Omar is accused, he is grabbed by all the men present and flung out into the snow, echoing the way that especially Muslim immigrants are often the first to blame for plight, while German immigrant and actual perpetrator Psyche is allowed to vibe entirely unmolested, and Lou is blamed but instead beaten into miscarriage and then belittled into a mental breakdown on the stairs of the dance floor. Noé's response to a similar suggestion was to say, "It wasn't a political issue, or a racial issue, or religious, or whatever. It's just that you're at a party and someone has spiked a drink. Who do you think has done it? The one who didn't drink. I'm not doing a story about the times, it's just a movie about dancers." I can't tell whether Noé's knee-jerk shutdown of this discussion was because he interpreted the interviewer as accusing him of being Islamophobic. He certainly wasn't saying, "Oh, it's just a movie about dancers," when he was philosophizing about how today's access to drugs and alcohol means that the human psyche is stripped back and exposed like ever before in history. Personally, that's the impression I got, that he shut the discussion down because he was worried that he was about to be accused of being racist because Omar died. For what it's worth, I didn't feel like this was his racism at all, but rather an accurate depiction of how racism fuels mob rule and mob justice, a harsh message that couples nicely with the new French extremity genre. Unfortunately, as a reactionary conservative through and through, I worry that Noé was too hell-bent on deflecting assumed criticism to stop and acknowledge that this story beat was provocative and actually quite impactful. A Song of Ice and Fire fanatic adds, "This film is about the impossibility of France actually existing as a nation because we are steeped too profoundly in the paranoia and violence that are foundational to the formation of gender and race in France." Pointing out that the location, a school, was key, the comment continues, "It's impossible to fight the education and hurt stemming from years of violence. They have been internalized into the most potent desires of every French person." So what we see is that beneath the myth of multicultural France is the reality of an inability to empathize, communicate and care for one another. So the sex appeal of the dance becomes sexual violence, and the energy becomes mania, and the racial divisions become sites of violence. Hence the title, "Living is a Collective Impossibility." Ultimately, all we are left with is tragedy, and the tragedy specific to French ghetto culture is one of violence and often one of hypermasculinity. Tim Palmer, author of Brutal Intimacy, Analysing Contemporary French Cinema, describes New French Extremity cinema as a cinema of brutal intimacy. This isn't merely due to depictions of literal bodies, but due to the way the overarching theme of voyeurism forces an intimacy with the subject material. In the case of Climax, this is done through the use of the camera as the 25th cast member, injecting the audience right into the fray and creating a sense of presence through uninterrupted camera shots that follow cast members physically across the set, hovering just above their shoulders. The use of the dance floor as a womb creates a metaphor that renders the entire set a body. The tight corridors create an intimacy with the cast that cannot be escaped without physically turning the movie off. In an interview with The Guardian, Noé explains that he was changed by the death of his mother. Previously a man who liked to collect things and keep mementos, this hobby was abandoned when his mother passed. When your mother dies in your arms, your perception of life changes. I think the whole thing is just a fleeting illusion. It doesn't last, and if there is any paradise or hell, it's right here, right now. Comparing the present place, the womb of the nation, to paradise or hell bears interesting implications. Noé's personal feminism sits in that boomer range where he celebrates the female body whilst also opposing its autonomy. To quote his interview with SBS Australia, Noé comments, "Female nudity has been seen in art and statues, in parks and so on, but nowadays Playboy magazines don't show nipples, and on social media like Instagram they don't let women show their nipples. But you can show guns, and you can show car accidents with people cut to pieces. It's weird how anything linked to the most natural portion of reproduction, a sexy woman or a sexy man, which excites you visually, that part of the animal needs of the human person is being repressed and controlled." For the record, you can't show car accidents, but I get your point. The thing is, this plea for a more free media, free the nipples so to speak, is so often co-opted by people wishing to enjoy more explicit and more available images of sexy women under the facade of feminism, trying to suggest that women are stifled by society and that it would be righteous to emancipate them from their control, but specifically their breasts. And only their breasts. As you can gain from my tone, this is often done in bad faith or with strictly exploitative intention. Caught off guard in a rare moment, captured in his interview with The Guardian, Noé was asked whether he had children of his own. He answered, "No kids. No kids, no abortions. I'm not pro-life, but I'm not pro-death." The interviewer made a point to include that Noé laughed embarrassedly and reached for his cigarette, as he bloody well should. Noé's ghastly personal politics betray an attitude to women whereby he seeks more avenues to masturbate to them, but opposes their access to personal choice. Opposing abortion doesn't make you pro-life, and not having kids doesn't make you pro-death. It's a false dichotomy. Climax, a movie so blithely described by Noé as just a movie about dancers, wears that anti-choice motif firmly on its arm. Discussion about abortion is barked out by female characters in ways too cruel and detached to be based in any kind of reality, remarking that, "I'm glad she didn't abort him." When discussing Emmanuel and Tito, Selva delivered an observation so robotic that it harkened back to those videos about abortion I had to watch at my extremely religious primary and secondary schools. Lou is pregnant, and her place in the opening shot of the movie, giving up and bleeding in the snow, places a prominence onto her character afforded to no one else. Combining that with the fact that she's pregnant, doesn't know who the father is doubted about her pregnancy, and there's a major emphasis on God across the film, draws distinct parallels between her and Mother Mary. Obviously, Jesus was born. Lou's child will not be born, especially not if she crawls out into the snow and dies. If there's any parallel here, subconscious or otherwise, then obviously the devil, Psyche in this case, sabotaged this immaculate conception, and Jesus was not born to free these people of their sins, thus humanity is damned forevermore, i.e. Dom and the rest of the group really fucked up, and Psyche just watches and dances. After the miscarriage plot resolves on the dance floor with Lou's mental breakdown, this room becomes hell. As though this represented the last barrier against evil, the last support holding the dance troupe up, it all goes downhill from there. I don't think this is a Christian movie necessarily, or saying Jesus being born was good or whatever. It's provocative, but doesn't feel particularly well fleshed out if it was the intention. Rather, there's a clear association with a distinctly anti-choice attitude. Noé seems to have contempt for women generally, views them as capricious, unreliable, or hysterical. Our next category of French extremity is problematic politics. French extremity films, like many genres, are not strictly left or right wing. In fact, there's a great debate as to whether they're even progressive or reactionary by nature. In the case of Climax specifically, yes, they show nipples and they have female protagonists and multicultural casts, but demonstrate some clearly very conservative politics. Personally, I see Noé as a reactionary conservative. He seeks feminism only when arguing that female nipples should be visible on screen, but opposes freedom of choice for those same women when it comes to abortion rights, and his movie is heavily laden with an anti-choice message. His conservative attitudes towards homosexuality have cropped up in his filmmaking too, to his dry and often frustratingly smug amusement. His movie Irreversible features a 9-minute anal rape scene of a young woman walking through an underpass. Her rapist? A homosexual man who could not help himself from sullying and obliterating her beauty, even if it's female. Where Noé's smug amusement comes in is his observations on the reception. In a confessional interview with publication Rabbit's Foot, when asked about how Irreversible's extremely controversial homosexual villain was received, he remarked, "In 2002, most reviews were insisting on the fact that Vincent Cassel's character was homophobic, and some suggested that I was probably a Nazi homophobe too. But in 2023, because the movie was re-released by distributors specializing in LGBTQ cinema, there was not one article saying that the movie or the character was homophobic. While the gay characters of Climax forego the same damning judgment they see in Irreversible as salacious predators and active dangers to innocent women, Climax's biases are most evident in the way that Noe writes and characterizes black men and women. In the talking head segment of Climax, Cyborg and his friend talk like rapists. They discuss following two white women to their bedrooms and raping them anally, showing them what they have. They laugh maniacally together at the mere thought. Their obsession with anal sex renders them the sodomites for which the entire group are punished, in a final scene biblically juxtaposed to Sodom and Gomorrah. Taylor is an incestuous rapist. Although his jealousy of Gazelle's relationship with Omar is initially teased as that of an overprotective big brother, truth soon comes to light when LSD lifts his inhibitions. Gazelle has a seizure on the dance floor after trying to escape him, and he drags her back to the room to rape her while unconscious. His jealousy causes him to accuse Omar of spiking the sangria, and it is him and only his black male counterparts that grab Omar and fling him out into the snow to freeze to death alone. Dom, upon learning that Lou is pregnant, kicks her so hard in the stomach multiple times that she miscarries. Dom's abundant cruelty is second to none in the story, leering over a crying, retching woman and accusing her of lying about her pregnancy. Although we see her crying at the end, clearly deeply regretting her actions, Noe's message of only the strong survive has resounding implications of what it means for Dom to be strong versus the strength of her white female counterparts, who found their strength in companionship and togetherness, be it platonic or sexual. In the final scene on the dance floor when the stage is turned into hell, both metaphorically and literally, it is the black men that remain, either animalistically fornicating on the floor or screaming and chanting in tongues as they contort their bodies and dance, their crunching bones echoing over the sound of the music, eyes rolled back so only the whites are visible, the demons of this earthly hell. Bizarrely, Noe would go on to say that due to the subject matter of Climax revolving around dance, most of the actors on stage were trans, gay, women, and people of colour. While discussing his colleagues, he clearly feels an immense amount of respect for them and applauds their work endlessly in interviews. Notably, he loves the minorities he meets and clearly sees those around him as human, only the characters he writes, while fictitious, betray his subconscious attitudes. That said, villainy isn't reserved for the black characters. In this hell is a white female German, Satan, who spikes the sangria and dances blithely while her cohorts die around her. David tries it on with every woman in the room, only to be beaten half to death by, again, the black men when they notice that he has clearly overstepped every available boundary. He follows choreographer Selva around the entire night, refusing to take no for an answer despite her screaming in his face multiple times. It's not that he disagrees with her no, it's just that he simply doesn't listen in the first place. Romain Guillemic's performance here was incredible because legitimately I have met men like this and it was frustrating to even witness. Still, white cruelty is the exception, not the rule. Finally, sexual violence is a key characteristic of New French Extremity cinema. Scholars on the topic are completely split on the merits of its inclusion. Dominique Russell, author of Rape in Art Cinema, argues that engagement with rape and its on-screen representation is part of your engagement with art cinema. But the other side of the extremely polarized coin just finds it trashy. Sexual assault is present in Climax, but employed uncharacteristically subtly, when we remember that this is the same man who made Irreversible. Gazelle, pursued by her older brother, has a seizure and passes out. He drags her off-screen and rapes her, but this is left to the audience's imagination. By and large, this is an aspect of the movie I didn't have much to comment on at all. It's quite cut and dry, isn't it? There's not much going on to dissect. This incestuous subplot was clearly included to make the audience feel very uncomfortable, and it succeeded in doing so. The implications of these scenes stayed with me for a long time. I felt sick after seeing this storyline in particular when many of the other subplots are far more explicit, and it's definitely cemented when you see the morning after shot. This is a compliment, by the way. Still, there's one line from Noe that really stuck with me, in particular about Climax. He said, "It's not necessarily the most aggressive ones that get punished. It's mostly about a collective screw-up," denying that the movie had any kind of moral agenda. I sat with this quote for a while, kind of chewed on it for a bit. Not necessarily the most aggressive ones that get punished felt like a very subconscious slip. Recalling the movie, are we implying that Taylor was the one punished for his aggression because he is the one cursed to remember it while Gazelle is his punishment? Is Dom punished for forcing Lou to miscarry because she has to live with the guilt versus a woman who has been assaulted so horribly that she lies in the snow and resigns to her fate? What was Omar punished for? The aggressive members of the group, smug aspirational rapist Cyborg for example, lies sleeping with a woman in his arms come morning. It's mostly a collective screw-up, Noe remarks, implying implying that Psyche spiking the bowl was some kind of collective mistake, some failure to monitor a bowl of sangria 24/7 in case a bad actor came in and spiked it, some failure to recognise that they were all high and corral a group of 24 drugged adults before they could be lurched onto a bad trip so horrific that it resulted in multiple deaths. It's weird, I thought as I wrote this script, because I liked this film when I saw it, but now I just think it's kind of garbage. In an interview with The Guardian, Noe asked how many moviegoers had walked out. I told him I spotted maybe 6 or 7. "Aw man, no, he groans, as if this is the worst news in the world. I usually have 25% of the audience walking out." Noe clearly takes pride in his work, and he should. For the record, he is an extremely talented filmmaker, but it's debatable as to whether his overriding intention to disgust hampers his ability to relay stories of any real meaning. French Extremity is often held at arm's reach from the misery porn and gore porn categories with the justification of, no, we're sending a message. It's very intellectual. But that justification lies in the eye of the beholder. It is entirely up to you as the viewer as to whether you consider this art or a flimsy excuse for voyeurism. Slate.com's David Edelstein remarked that there is something to be said for violence that isn't stylized and made to seem fun, that actually makes you feel like Alex in A Clockwork Orange, with your eyes pried open and no cathartic release. It could be argued that this is the only moral way to present violence, so that it hurts. Yet, many would say that discomfort for the sake of it is lacking without a greater message. Personally, I think that Climax is a masterpiece of cinema, with some of the most impressive filmmaking techniques I've ever seen, and one of the most consistently incredible performances I've ever known from a cast of amateur actors picked entirely based upon their ability to dance, not act, telling a boring and ill-conceived story I found to be completely lacking in substance. Well, narrative substance, anyway.